Millionaire saw a poor mother crying with her children at his son's grave. Then everything changed. The late afternoon haze draped Arlington Valley Memorial Park like a muted gray veil, dimming the sky and softening every sound until the world felt suspended in time. Towering oaks stretched their bare branches like weary guardians, their silhouettes trembling slightly in the cold wind. Along the stone path, worn smooth by years of footsteps, Alexander Hale walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man carrying a weight no one else could see. His polished black shoes clicked sharply against the stones, each step slicing through the silence. Once he had been Crestwood City's greatest symbol of power, an empire builder whose real estate and private hospital chains shaped the skyline itself. They called him the Iron Emperor, a man untouched by fear, untouched by weakness, untouched by sentiment. But no one knew that beneath the steel facade was a heart fractured 3 years earlier, the day Ethan Hale, his only child, died in a sudden accident that rewrote the course of his life. Since that day, every month without fail, Alexander returned to Arlington Valley with a bouquet of bright sunflowers, Ethan's favorite. "They always turned toward the light," Ethan once said. The memory stabbed him each time it surfaced. The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the path, their scratchy whispers echoing like restless spirits. Alexander tightened his grip on the flowers and turned down the familiar narrow trail that led to Ethan's grave. He expected what he always found there: silence, stillness, and an old ache that no longer surprised him. But today, the silence was broken. Just a few steps away from the marble headstone engraved Ethan Alexander Hale, Alexander froze. His body locked in place, breath caught midair. Kneeling at his son's grave was a thin, exhausted-looking woman dressed in worn, frayed clothing, and clinging desperately to her sides were 2 little boys, twins, no more than 5 or 6, their faces blotchy from crying, their sobs rising and falling like wounded animals. The scene was so jarring that for a moment Alexander could only stare. The boys' cries fractured the quiet like shards of glass, each sound piercing in its rawness. He felt something in his chest twist, an emotion he didn't welcome, didn't understand, and instantly crushed. He stepped forward, voice cutting through the cold air like metal on stone. "You, this is my son's grave. What are you doing here?" The woman flinched and lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her face pale with exhaustion, yet beneath that fragility was a firmness, a kind of desperate strength that spoke of countless battles survived. I'm sorry," she murmured, trying to rise while the boys clung tighter to her coat. "We didn't know you would come today?" "That's irrelevant," Alexander replied, ice in every syllable. "You have no reason, no right to be here. I need you to leave immediately." The twins shrank back, frightened, but in the brief second their eyes met his, something inside Alexander jolted. Something disturbingly familiar flickered in their expressions, something he couldn't name and refused to acknowledge. He crushed the feeling instantly. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice low and dangerous. "And why are you crying at Ethan's grave?" The woman pulled her children close, lifted her face, and met his stare despite the tears still clinging to her lashes. "Sir, we have a reason to be here, and that reason has everything to do with your son." The wind rose again, cold and foreboding, as if the world itself braced for the truth about to change everything. The wind had quieted, yet the air between them thickened, so heavy, so close, it felt as though even a whispered breath could shatter it. The woman held her children tighter, her fingers trembling as if she feared that the cold around them might steal the boys from her arms. Alexander remained perfectly still, frozen somewhere between disbelief and irritation at this uninvited intrusion into his grief. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low but razor-sharp. The woman inhaled shakily, drawing courage from somewhere deep inside. My name is Sorenna Dawson, and these are my sons, Lucas and Axton." Alexander cast a glance at the boys. They kept their heads bowed, their thin shoulders quivering. Their fragility stirred nothing gentle inside him. It only fueled his annoyance. "Miss Dawson," he said, "you still haven't answered my question. Why are you here? Why are you crying at my son's grave? Do you even know where you're standing?" Sorenna bit her lip, fear flickering in her eyes, but beneath it was a stubbornness, a quiet, resilient fire. "I know exactly where I am, and that's why I came." "Explain yourself," Alexander demanded, but explanation didn't come right away. Sorenna looked down at her sons, smoothing Axton's hair to calm him, then lifted her gaze, meeting Alexander's with a fragile but unwavering determination, the look of someone who had been backed into a corner too many times and had decided finally to stop running. "Mr. Hale," she began softly, "I knew Ethan." For a second, Alexander didn't understand. "What did you say?" "I said Ethan and I were together." The world seemed to pause. The wind held its breath. Even the oak branches stopped swaying. A sharp, disorienting pressure spread through Alexander's chest, like someone had driven a cold blade straight through him. "That's nonsense," he snapped. "Ethan would have told me. He would never hide something like that." Sorenna didn't flinch. "He tried to tell you, many times, but he was afraid. Ethan told me you had already arranged a marriage for him with a wealthy partner's daughter. He said you would never accept someone like me." Heat rose in Alexander's face. Anger, not embarrassment. He hated hearing his son's life retold by a stranger, hated even more the possibility that she might be telling the truth. Even so, he clung to disbelief. "Even if this story of yours is true," he said coldly, "it still doesn't explain what you're doing at his grave, why you are crying here." Sorenna's gaze fell to her sons again. Lucas gripped her sleeve. Axton's breath trembled in his small chest. "Because," she whispered, eyes glistening, "Lucas and Axton are not only my children." The words hovered in the air, loaded, trembling, waiting to strike. Sorenna rested a hand on each boy's shoulder, her voice cracking. "They are Ethan's sons." Alexander felt the world tilt. The wind picked up suddenly, sending a swirl of leaves across the graves, as if nature itself reacted to her confession. He stared at the boys, really stared. There it was again, that haunting familiarity, the warm brown eyes with sparks of gold, the slight frown Ethan always wore when he was confused, the shape of their faces, their expressions, their silence. But Alexander crushed the recognition before it could take root. "No," he barked. "You're lying. This is a scam, a pathetic attempt to extort money from my family. I refuse to believe it." Sorenna didn't argue. She didn't plead. Instead, she reached into her worn coat and pulled out a photograph, creased, faded, handled too many times to count. She stepped forward and held it out to him. Then, "Look at this." Alexander hesitated, but he took the photograph. And deep down, even before he tilted it toward the light, he sensed that the storm Sorenna brought with her was only just beginning. The silence left hanging in the air after Sorenna's confession still clung tightly around them as Alexander stared down at the photograph she had given him. The tension from that moment, the weight of the truth that had been dropped like a blade, had not yet dissipated. It merely shifted, slipping from the cold air around them, straight into the marrow of his bones. In his hands, the world narrowed until only the image remained. Though faded and worn at the edges, its content struck with brutal clarity. Ethan, his son, smiling with a happiness Alexander had never witnessed in life. Ethan's arm wrapped around a younger, glowing Sorenna, and nestled in her arms were two tiny newborns wrapped in soft yellow blankets. Ethan leaned in, kissing one infant's forehead while the other slept peacefully, cocooned in the warmth of their parents' embrace. The sight hit Alexander like a silent blow to the chest. He could not deny it. The resemblance, the tenderness, the absolute authenticity. Every detail screamed truth. "He wanted to tell you," Sorenna said softly, as if sensing the storm in his gaze. "Ethan wanted to introduce us, but he was scared. He said you always planned his life for him, even the woman he was supposed to marry." Alexander clenched his teeth. The words stung with the precision of a needle stabbing straight into his pride. "If he loved you, he would have told me," he snapped, but the defiance in his voice lacked its usual certainty. Sorenna's reply was a quiet wound. "He was terrified of losing us, and in the end, he lost everything anyway." That sentence held Alexander hostage for a few seconds. Something like regret flickered, too quickly for him to accept, but long enough to sting. He turned away before she could see the hesitation in his eyes and walked off, breath tight, coat whipping behind him as if he could outrun the weight pressing down on him. In the car, anger and panic tangled into an unfamiliar knot in his chest. He didn't allow himself to dwell on feelings. Not now, not ever. Action was simpler. Action was control. He dialed Samuel Drake, the one man who never failed him. "Samuel, I need everything on Sorenna Dawson, her and the children, all of it." "How soon, sir?" "Tonight." The next morning, Samuel stood in Alexander's enormous glass-walled office, setting a thick file on the desk. Alexander fixed his gaze on him, sensing that whatever lay inside would either confirm or destroy what he feared. "I found everything," Samuel said quietly. Alexander opened the file. The details cut deeper with each line. Sorenna Dawson, born in Crestwood City, 8 years working as a diner waitress, no criminal record, no substances, fired after Ethan died because she missed shifts to care for the children, living in a shelter with the boys. A poor woman, but clean, honest, struggling. And somehow that truth irritated Alexander more than a lie ever could. He flipped to the photographs of the twins. The moment his eyes met theirs, even on paper, something sharp twisted in his chest. The same warm brown irises flecked with gold. The same subtle frown Ethan wore as a child. The same shape of the chin. A sense of betrayal rose in him, not toward Sorenna, toward Ethan. "Why didn't he tell me?" Alexander whispered, voice rough, almost unrecognizable. Samuel placed a white envelope on the desk. DNA test. Proper channels. Alexander's pulse hammered. He tore open the envelope and unfolded the crisp sheet. The first line hollowed him out. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Ethan Hale is the biological father of Lucas and Axton Dawson. The room fell silent. For a breath, just one, something warm flickered inside him. A fragile spark of hope, of longing, of the Ethan he lost. But it was quickly swallowed by a harsher truth. Sorenna was poor, unstable, struggling, and these boys were Hale blood. Alexander lifted his head. The steel returned to his eyes. "They will not grow up like that," he said, each word sharp as a blade. "I will not let Ethan's sons live in poverty." Samuel waited for the final command. Alexander delivered it with absolute, cold resolve. "My grandsons will not grow up in poverty." Alexander's expansive office was steeped in the dim, fading light of late afternoon, a cold wash of gold that made the room feel distant, hollow, much like the turmoil twisting inside him. Across from his massive desk, Attorney Collins sat with his spine straight, fingers interlaced, the look of a man preparing for a negotiation he already knew would not be simple. The DNA results still echoed through Alexander's mind like a pulse, a reminder that Lucas and Axton carried the Hale bloodline, stirring both pride and a dull ache he refused to name. "I want custody of them," Alexander said, steady and absolute. "As soon as possible." Collins exhaled slowly. "Sir, the court system is not the same as your business empire. Without proof that Sorenna Dawson is unfit, you cannot win a legal custody battle." Alexander's eyes hardened, cutting through the room like a blade. "Are you telling me it's impossible?" "I'm telling you it's nearly impossible. She's poor, yes, but poverty is not grounds for removal. She has no criminal record, no history of neglect, no addictions. On paper, she's a mother doing everything she can." Alexander leaned back in silence, the kind so heavy it felt like the room was holding its breath. Then he spoke, softly, dangerously. "Then find evidence, or create it." Collins flinched, barely, but didn't protest. He knew too well. Once Alexander Hale made a decision, the world bent accordingly, willingly or not. From that day on, Sorenna's life began to fracture in ways she could not see or understand. Social workers started appearing unannounced at the shelter, questioning everything: where the boys slept, what they ate, whether they were missing school. Their eyes were cold, assessing, as if they were hunting for flaws rather than seeking truth. Sorenna answered every question, though her heart pounded with a fear she couldn't quite name. Then came the next blow, one she had no defense for. At the family diner where she picked up evening shifts, the manager pulled her aside. $50 are missing. The camera shows only you near the drawer." His voice was flat, final. Sorenna froze. "I didn't take anything, I swear." But her words fell dead between them. "You're fired, effective immediately." She found herself standing outside in the pouring rain, apron crumpled in her arms, Lucas and Axton clinging to her legs. She felt like the world she'd been barely holding together had suddenly slipped from her grasp. Before she could even recover, the shelter expelled them as well, citing rule violations. She didn't understand. No one explained. That night, the three of them huddled beneath the narrow overhang behind a church, the cold wind clawing at their thin jackets as the boys curled into her side. And then came the cruelest moment of all. The rain fell in heavy sheets the next afternoon as Sorenna walked her sons home from the library. A police car screeched to a stop beside them, water splashing up the curb. Two officers stepped out. "Sorenna Dawson?" She tightened her grip on her children. "Yes? What's—" "You're under arrest for the theft of $50. You have the right to remain silent." Sorenna shook her head violently. "No, I didn't do anything." "Please, listen, I didn't—" The handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, icy against her skin. Lucas and Axton screamed, grabbing her legs. "Mommy! Mommy, please don't go!" Sorenna dropped to her knees before they could pull her away, pressing frantic kisses to their foreheads. "Don't take them. Please, they're all I have." But the rain devoured her pleas. Two small bodies were torn from her arms, their tear-streaked faces fading behind the police car's glass. It was the last time, for 20 long years, that Sorenna would see her sons. On the morning of her trial, Sorenna entered the courtroom with trembling hands, her gray prison uniform still damp from the rain she'd walked through. Lucas and Axton weren't there. They had been taken from her the day she was arrested, and the absence of their small hands in hers felt like a hole tearing through her chest. She scanned the sterile, too-bright room, hoping for a miracle, but none came. Beside her sat her court-appointed attorney, a young man with exhausted eyes and a thin stack of papers that looked pitifully insufficient. He offered her a brief nod. "I'll do my best," he said, though his weak voice had no strength to keep her last thread of hope from unraveling. The trial began with evidence Sorenna knew was fabricated. The surveillance footage, sloppily edited, was projected across the courtroom, showing her standing near the cash register at the exact moment the money supposedly vanished. When her attorney attempted to object, the judge dismissed him with a curt shake of the head. Proceed? Then came the search of her belongings. One court officer opened her bag, and as if by some dark magic, the missing $50 bill appeared neatly tucked inside. Sorenna froze. She had never seen it before. She didn't even know she still had that bag when they arrested her. "That's the missing cash," the officer declared. "No, that's not mine. I didn't take anything," Sorenna cried, but her voice was swallowed by murmurs spreading across the room. The diner manager, the man who had thrown her apron back at her in the rain, took the stand, his lie delivered with chilling ease. "She always seemed untrustworthy. I believe she took the money." Sorenna shot to her feet, eyes blazing. "You're lying. I worked for you for 5 years. I never—" "Order in the court!" The gavel slammed. Her lawyer remained seated, silent, as though he had surrendered before the trial even began. And when the judge finally lifted his gaze, Sorenna already knew the verdict before it was spoken. Sorenna Dawson, based on the evidence presented, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison. Her knees buckled. She barely felt the two officers pulling her upright. She saw only the figure sitting at the back of the courtroom, still composed, immaculate in a black suit. Alexander Hale, unmoving as a statue, expressionless, but in his eyes a dark glint of satisfaction. You monster!" Sorenna screamed, voice tearing through the chamber. "You destroyed my life. You stole my children. Alexander, you devil!" The officers dragged her away, her cries echoing like a soul being ripped apart. Meanwhile, across the city, Lucas and Axton were escorted through the grand doors of Alexander's mansion, a world of marble floors, silent hallways, and cold, expensive air. No warmth, no laughter, no mother, only luxury and emptiness. The first days inside the Hale mansion felt to Lucas and Axton like stepping into a vast foreign world, grand enough to overwhelm them, yet cold like a hospital hallway. High ceilings, polished marble floors, priceless paintings lining every wall. Everything was beautiful, almost unreal, but none of it warm enough to make the boys feel they belonged. On their first night, Alexander stood before them, voice controlled, softened by effort rather than affection. "Your mother is very sick. She's gone somewhere to receive treatment. When she gets better, she'll come back." Lucas burst into tears instantly. Axton tried to be strong, swallowing hard, but soon he broke down too. Their small faces were soaked with tears as they clung to each other, terrified that clinging was all they had left. The following nights were filled with the sound of their crying, echoing in a bedroom so large the echoes felt like someone else's grief. Alexander hired a child psychologist who tried gently to speak with them, but every mention of mother made Lucas tremble and Axton collapse into sobs. Alexander didn't know how to hold a child or how to soothe one. Love, as most people understood it, was something he'd never learned to express. What he did understand was providing, and he excelled at that. He enrolled them in the best private school in the city, hired top tutors for every subject, signed them up for piano, swimming, tennis, filled their playroom with toys other children only dreamed of. But what the boys truly needed, a hug, reassurance, warmth, was something he had no idea how to give. Lucas grew quieter, retreating behind invisible walls only he could feel. Axton forced himself to be strong, refusing to cry, refusing to seem weak, until that strength hardened into emotional emptiness. Years passed, and the transformation continued, not toward happier versions of themselves, but into reflections of Alexander, disciplined, reserved, sharp, always in control. Yet beneath that polished exterior was a hollow space that never healed. And then 20 years slipped by. Lucas became a respected financial investor, brilliant, decisive, but so solitary his colleagues barely knew a thing about him. Axton founded DN Creative Solutions, a rising name in the advertising world. He crafted emotional strategies for brands, yet struggled to feel those emotions himself. They had grown powerful, successful, formidable, but their hearts had learned silence far more easily than love. And while Lucas and Axton's lives marched forward on paths paved with success yet hollowed by silence, somewhere not far from them, an old iron gate was about to open after 20 long years. Sorenna, the woman they had been forced to forget, was stepping back into the world, carrying with her the one thing that had never dimmed, the unbroken desire to find her sons again. Sorenna walked out of the prison gate into a sky as pale as a memory not yet restored. The iron door clanged shut behind her, and for a moment the world ahead felt too wide, too alive, so open that her feet didn't seem to remember how to step into it. 20 years had carved away her youth, leaving a 46-year-old woman with silver strands in her hair, a thin frame, and hollow cheeks. Yet deep in her eyes, a small flame still burned, a fragile but stubborn glow that refused to die. The one hope that had kept her alive. Somewhere out there, her boys were still breathing. The officer handed her a small envelope and an old bus ticket. $60. One way. Good luck. Sorenna only nodded. She didn't expect sympathy. She carried only one purpose now. Find Lucas and Axton. Mama is coming. Just wait for me a little longer. Finding a job was a cruel echo of the same closed door. Every time she heard the question, "Do you have a criminal record?" she felt her heart tighten. Every time she answered, "Yes," she watched the warmth drain from the other person's eyes. "Sorry, we can't hire you." The phrase became a refrain she learned to endure. Yet she kept going. A mother's hope is the last thing to die. Eventually, a cleaning company gave her a chance at Skyline Corporate Tower, a gleaming giant that made her feel smaller every time she walked beneath its mirrored glass. Each morning, pushing her cleaning cart through the bright lobby, she would glance at the crowds hurrying past and whisper in her heart, "Lucas. Axton. Could one of you have walked here once? I'm still looking." And then, one morning, it happened. Sorenna was polishing the elevator mirror when she heard footsteps behind her. She looked up. A young man entered the lobby, tall, confident, eyes intelligent, yet shadowed by something unspoken. Axton. Time stilled. Sorenna froze, gripping the mop handle so tightly her fingers whitened. 20 years apart, yet a mother recognizes her child in less than a heartbeat. Axton's gaze brushed hers, and something flickered. Confusion, softness, an ache that belonged to a memory just out of reach. It wasn't recognition, but something deep inside him stirred. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than the formality required. Sorenna forced a steady breath. "Good morning." But her voice trembled despite the smile she held. As the elevator doors closed, Axton turned back and looked at her once more. That single look sent a tremor through Sorenna's spine, as if he was reaching for a memory stolen before he ever had the chance to keep it. All morning, Axton found himself unable to focus. Why does she feel familiar? Have I met her before? No. Impossible. Right? In the days that followed, he returned to the lobby more often, first to greet her, then to talk. Their small conversation slowly deepened. Weather turned into stories about work, work into quiet confessions about loneliness, pressure, and an emptiness inside him he couldn't name. "I'm successful," Axton admitted one day, gaze drifting. "But sometimes I feel like I lost something important when I was very young. I try to remember, but it's like fog, like someone is calling me from far away." Sorenna turned aside, hiding the tears that burned her eyes. "Maybe memories don't disappear," she whispered. "Maybe they're just waiting to come back." After that, Axton began bringing her a cup of hot tea each morning. "You work too hard. Please drink this." And Sorenna, cleaning his office, left little notes on his desk. "You're doing great. Remember to breathe." People in the building whispered. Why was the cold, brilliant young CEO speaking so warmly to a janitor? But Axton didn't care. Around Sorenna, he felt something he had never once felt in his life. "Being around her feels like coming home," he murmured once, barely realizing he spoke aloud. Sorenna heard it, and her heart cracked with pain, yet healed with joy. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. The world they'd built was too fragile, so she stayed close, loving her son silently, tenderly, grateful for every single sunrise she could look at him again, even if he didn't yet know her name in his heart. One bleak afternoon, Alexander decided to visit Axton's office unannounced, a habit carved deep into him after decades of controlling every corner of his world. He walked through the main lobby of the building, face cold as steel, eyes sharp enough to cut through glass. Employees bowed their heads respectfully, but Alexander didn't acknowledge a single one. He went straight to the executive floor. The door to Axton's office was slightly ajar, and through that narrow opening, Alexander saw something that made his blood crystallize. Axton was smiling, truly smiling, something he rarely did. And standing beside him was a woman. Axton said something, and Sorenna laughed softly, the warmth of it brightening the entire room more than the ceiling lights ever could. Alexander stumbled back a step, heart pounding. Even after 20 years, he recognized Sorenna instantly, the way a man recognizes a scar he gave himself. No, impossible. She cannot return. A visceral fear clawed through him, the fear of losing control, losing his grandsons, losing the empire he had built on secrecy and dominance. He pushed the door open without knocking. "Axton," he ordered, voice sharp as a blade. "Step outside, now." Axton blinked in surprise, but followed him into the hallway. "What is it, Grandpa?" Alexander pointed into the office, where Sorenna stood frozen. "Fire that woman, immediately." Axton stared at him, slowly, firmly. "No, she's a good employee, and I respect her." It was the first time in his life Axton had said no to Alexander Hale, the Iron Emperor. Anger twisted Alexander's face. "You don't understand. She's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Axton countered. "Because you said so? I'm done following blindly." A crack split inside Alexander. He felt Axton slipping away from him faster than he could grasp. He spun around and stormed down the hall like a shadow unraveling at the edges. Sorenna watched from a distance, uncertainty tightening her chest. She sensed a storm gathering, one meant for her. Alexander entered the elevator. As the doors closed, his eyes burned not with anger alone, but with the frantic desperation of a man on the verge of losing everything. Rain began to fall as his car sped into the street. He gripped the wheel, teeth clenched, whispering, "She will not ruin what I built." The underground parking garage had already sunk into darkness by the time Sorenna finished her shift later than usual. The dim yellow lights flickered overhead, casting broken stripes of light along the concrete pillars like the uneven breathing of a forgotten place. The air was cold enough that her breath drifted in faint white clouds as she walked. She pulled her worn coat tighter around herself, her hands still aching after hours of scrubbing. Yet deep inside, something warm pulsed quietly, an unfamiliar, precious warmth she had not felt in 20 long years. The warmth of standing near her son, hearing him laugh, watching him live the life she had prayed for every single night of her imprisonment. Sorenna moved slowly toward the exit, unaware that in the darkest corner of the garage, a pair of eyes was following her every step. A sleek black sedan sat with its lights off, silent as a predator waiting to strike. As she passed by, the car door clicked open, and Alexander Hale stepped out of the shadows. "Sorenna," his voice rang out, low, sharp, hard as a blade. Sorenna halted. Her body tensed, but not out of fear this time, only bracing for the confrontation she had long known would come. "I knew you'd show up," she murmured, calm as though speaking to a fate that had long rooted itself in her life. Alexander strode closer, his eyes darkening, filled with anger, but also with a rising panic that he could no longer hide. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" he hissed. "You're trying to get close to Axton, trying to tear down everything I built, but I will not allow that." Sorenna let out a faint, brittle laugh, a sound shaped by decades of sorrow. "You already destroyed my life once. What else is there left for you to break?" "You need to leave this city," Alexander said, his voice like a command. "Immediately, before Axton learns anything." Sorenna lifted her gaze to him, her eyes so steady, so honest, that it made Alexander falter for a heartbeat. 20 years ago, you stole my children from me. You threw me into prison like tossing a shadow into a pit. You really think I'm still afraid of you? You don't understand." "Oh, I understand," she cut in. "You never loved your son. You only wanted to own him. And now, you think you can own Axton too." Alexander's jaw tightened until the muscles trembled. "Shut your mouth. You don't know what I sacrificed." Sorenna stepped closer, stopping just a hand's distance from him. "I lost everything because of you, but I will not lose my son again, not ever." And at that moment, footsteps echoed across the garage. "Axton," Sorenna whispered, her chest tightening. He stood a short distance away, his face drained of color. He looked at them, first at Alexander, then at Sorenna, his eyes swirling with confusion and a dawning fear of the truth. "I heard everything," he said, voice trembling. What are you two hiding from me?" Alexander stepped forward, agitation rising like steam. "Axton, you don't need to listen to her." Sorenna turned toward her son, her hands trembling but her eyes unwavering. "Axton, I am your mother." Time cracked open like glass. Axton stood motionless for a long beat, then let out a startled, disbelieving laugh. No, that's impossible. My mother died. Grandpa told me that." Sorenna reached into her bag and pulled out the worn photograph, holding it up under the weak garage light. There was Ethan, young, radiant, holding 2 newborn babies. And beside him, Sorenna, smiling with exhaustion and overflowing love. Axton stared. The world grew unbearably silent. Then he saw it, the face of one of the babies. His own face. He sucked in a breath. "Oh my God, is this real?" Sorenna nodded, tears streaming freely. Alexander looked away. His silence confessed everything more loudly than words. Axton's scream tore through the garage, raw and echoing. 20 years? You lied to me for 20 years? He turned to Sorenna, who stood trembling, terrified, hopeful. "Mom," he choked out, using a word he had not spoken in 2 decades. Sorenna didn't speak. She simply opened her arms, and Axton collapsed into them like a child whose entire childhood had been stolen. She held him tightly, her whole body shaking, tears falling into his hair, tears she had held back for 20 years. Alexander watched, his world crumbling piece by piece. Axton stepped back from the embrace and faced him, eyes cold, blazing with a fury that cut deeper than any insult. "You stole my life." Alexander tried to take a step toward him, but his legs stiffened, like chains held him in place. "Axton, I did this for—" "Not for me," Axton snapped. "For yourself." He reached for Sorenna's hand, squeezing it with certainty. "I'm leaving you, and this time, forever." Mother and son walked toward the bright exit, their shadows merging as they moved toward the light, leaving Alexander behind, alone, swallowed by the cold darkness of the parking garage, finally confronted by the truth that none of his power could silence. Axton moved out of the Hale mansion in complete silence. He took nothing with him except a few clothes and the old photo album that had always filled him with an unexplainable emptiness. Now he knew why. And so he chose to live with Sorenna in a small, aging apartment filled with warmth, something he had never once felt in the cold grandeur of the Hale estate. A few days later, Lucas returned from his business trip. After hearing the truth that had been buried for 20 years, he drove straight to Axton's new home. When the door opened, he froze at the sight of Sorenna. Time folded into a single fragile moment. "Are you really?" Lucas whispered, voice cracking. Sorenna didn't speak. She simply opened her arms. Lucas stepped forward in a breath that broke apart, then wrapped his arms around her, around Axton too, pulling all three into a trembling, tear-soaked embrace. The two boys who had been stolen from her were finally home again, no longer children, yet as vulnerable as they had been at 6 years old. In the days that followed, they learned to heal. Late dinners, quiet questions, the lost fragments of memory pieced together one by one. "When you were little, you wouldn't sleep unless I sang," Sorenna murmured, "and Axton never let go of my hand." Axton smiled faintly. Lucas wiped his tears with the back of his hand, trying to steady his voice. Together they visited Ethan's grave on a soft, sunlit morning. Sorenna placed a bouquet of white flowers on the cold stone. "Ethan," she whispered, "the truth is finally out. Our sons know everything, and they're here, with me." Lucas bowed his head. Axton placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. The breeze stirred the grass gently, like a tender touch from the past. From a distance, beneath the shade of a tree, Alexander stood watching, alone, silent, his shoulders heavy with the weight of everything he had destroyed. Regret had come, far too late. Axton turned to look at him one last time. There was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes, but not forgiveness, and never forgetting. Sorenna held both her son's hands. Love cannot be bought. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be forced. It exists only when given freely. And Alexander learned this truth far too late.